Hi all, welcome to Cyber Warfare Labs AWS Cloud Red Team course. In this module, we will discuss about one of the services provided by AWS is Relational Database Services. In short terms, we can say RDS. So in this module, we will discuss what are the components of RDS have, just like authentication mechanism, how we can restrict for unauthorized access, and what is the RDS proxy, how this proxy can help us to for improvement the security and scalability, and how we can enumerate the RDS using command line utility for our red team assessment, and how we can exfiltrate that data which is there in RDS database. So which cover all these things in this module. So let's start. Okay, so first we'll discuss about what is actually RDS. So Amazon Relational Database Services is a web service that makes it easier to set up, operate, and scale a relational database in AWS Cloud. So basically, RDS is a service which provides MariaDB database and MySQL database, Amazon Aura database, SQL Server database, as well as Postgres database. So these are the engine which RDS support. So all our engines are relational database. So you can use those engines for your scalability, for a easy to maintain, and for a enhanced security. So this is the core services provided by RDS. So you can choose any of the engines, and you can use all these engines for your in production environment. So most of the organizations, they are using MySQL, some of you are using the SQL server, MS SQL server, some of are using Postgres. So all are the engines comes under the RDS services. Okay, now how its RDS is look like. So let's see. First we'll discuss what is RDS. So let's click on the RDS section here, or just type relational database services in find service options. So you can see here, this is a dashboard of Amazon RDS. So you can create a new instance, you can create a new clusters, and you can choose what engines you want to have. Suppose if you want to create a database, it will first ask which engine you want to choose. So it will allow to choose Amazon Aura, MySQL, MariaDB, PostgreSQL, Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server. So whatever engine it suits to your requirement, you can choose it, and you can set up your relational database. So this will allow you how we can and what engine we can choose according to our requirement. Now what next? So now we are discussing about how we can access the RDS. So what are the authentication mechanism which is used in AWS to authenticate to RDS, or basically the engine which is supported by RDS. So you can see here we have these engines which is supported by RDS, and you can authenticate to those engines. Suppose if you have a MySQL instance, how you can authenticate to this instance? So RDS provide a three-way you can authenticate to the instance or database. First one is password base, which is a traditional we used in our on-prem infrastructure as well. So we have a database, we know the username, password, the host name, as well as the port. You can directly connect to the database. So this is a traditional method we have. You have a password which is a master password of any of the database, and you can connect it. Second thing, we have a password as well as IAM based. So suppose the password is hard coded, and if you don't want to allocate a password, you can assign a role, IAM role, and what permission you can set, so they will get a token, and they can use this token to authenticate to the particular instance. Suppose there is a user which want to authenticate to MySQL database instance, so they can request for a token. Token will be a temporary token which will valid for 15 minutes, and they can access the MySQL instance, and they can do all this operation without needed any password. So this is will important you to enable which option you want to go and how it's suitable to you. So it's better than the password, because password will be valid for an entire lifetime until you not rotate it or not change it, but this token will be expire within 15 minutes. Third one is recently Microsoft AWS introduced Microsoft Kerberos based authentication. So that will also allow, so if you have a password or if you don't have a password, you can still authenticate using the Kerberos. That will also valid for a short period of time. So if you are if you are using your on-prem Active Directory, and if you want to access the any of the instance, you can directly authenticate using Kerberos based authentications. So these are the authentication methods which we used in our red teaming to understand about what authentication method is supported by what type of database. Suppose few database or few database engines in RDS supports only the password based authentication. Some of supports password as well as IAM based authentications. So it will help us if you don't find any password, but still if you compromise any instance or roles which allow you to access the token, and then token will be allow us to access the RDS instance or any database. So this is how important to understand about what authentication method is supported by what instance. So this is all about the authentication method, how it's work. You can see here when I'm going to set up this thing, you have to choose. So you have to choose which engine you want. Suppose I'm going for a MySQL. You click on this MySQL and then you can select here. You have to specify the admin. This is the master credential. You have to specify it. And here is a, let's go down, and there is, you can specify that authentication method. So here you can specify what type of authentication method you want to support for this instance. So you can even allow only for password authentication. You can allow password and AIM database authentication, and you can also allow the password and Kerberos authentication. But it's depend what version you use, because it's a Kerberos based authentication is recently released. So this is how you can understand about what authentication mechanism supported by what instance, and you can use those methods to perform your red team operations. So let's move to the next point. RDS access restrictions. So basically RDS provide an instance or an engine, how you can connect to the engine, what authentication mechanism we already discussed. Now what are the restrictions they can put to prevent from the unauthorized access? So for a red teamers to understand about how you can authenticate it, or what are the best way you can access those particular instance. So suppose we have RDS services and we have a MySQL instance which is running there. So you can see here it's allow only authorized user or resource to access RDS and block unauthorized access. So there is a two type of restrictions are there. One is IAM level restrictions, or second one is network level restrictions. Or we can say what are the mechanism which will authenticate to a particular database instance. So suppose when we're talking about IAM level restriction, that means we can define that only these set of instance, EC2 instance or Lambda function can request for a tokens and can access the database. So this is the first kind of restriction we put. So suppose if you don't have a password, if you don't share the password, you only share the access using authentication, IAM based authentications, you can check how we can put the restrictions. And this is how only few instance, not all EC2 instance, not all Lambda function, but only a particular role can access this RDS function. So this is how we can put the restrictions using IAM level. Second thing, we can also put the restrictions on network level. So suppose generally what happen, RDS generally we can place the RDS in a private VPCs. The VPC doesn't have a much connectivity in the public internet. So we have to check and what IP is they allow using security group or network level as access control, and what are the VPC we can communicate. So suppose if you have a RDS instance which is there in a private VPC, you have the instance which is there within the same VPC if it's a private instance. If it's a public instance, you can access from the outside the world. So network level access restrictions will allow you to restrict the accessibility of the instance for a particular network. So network may be a VPC, you can define using subnet, so you can define the public IP, you can define the private IP, or you can define the source IP where they can connect to this instance. So this is how you can restrict to access the RDS instance. This will help you when you're going for performing a red team operations. So suppose you found a lot of situations where you cannot directly access the RDS instance, because RDS contain a critical informations for organizations and it's not directly accessible. So you have to find out how restrictions they implemented. Is it role-based restrictions, or is there any network-based restriction, or is there any combination of both? And how we can find out, or how we can get those remove those restrictions or get the solutions to access the RDS instance. So this is how you can identify. So first you have to understand about how we can put the restriction, then only you can think about how we can break those restrictions. So this is about how we can access it. Now so now we will discuss about RDS proxy. So basically RDS proxy handles the network traffic between client application and the database. So suppose how it's look like. You have a database engine here. Suppose you have a database engine here, MySQL, MS SQL, whatever database engine you have, and you have your applications. Suppose you running the application on top of EC2 instance or containers or Lambda functions, whatever you have your applications, the code. If you want to access the engine directly, you can access it, but you need two things. One is you need either a credential as well as you have rights to access it. That means your connectivity from network level. If you are can access this instance, you can directly access this one. But you need a credential as well as your VPC or the instance which is running there should be accessible from this services where application is running to the where database instance is running. There is one more way we can set up the RDS proxy here. This is the RDS proxy. This proxy will help you to forward your traffic from client to your RDS server. So this is the client and this is the RDS server. So it's basically sits between your client and RDS server. So basically it's handle the network traffic between client application and the database. Second one is RDS proxy makes application more scalable, more resilient to database failure and more secure. So it's basically provide the resiliency as well as securities. Third one is RDS proxy also enable you to enforce AWS identity and access management authentication for database and securely store credential in AWS Secret Manager. So what does it mean? Suppose if you want to authenticate using the credentials, or you have the password based authentications, so you can store your credential in Secret Manager. No need to hard-coded your credential in application itself. You can store your credential in Secret Manager, and you have to just define the role for this Secret Manager. So basically how does it work? This is your application, and if you allow for credential based authentication or password based authentication, you can store your credential here. That's it. You have to specify the proxy address here. So once your application is trying to connect to the proxy, it will automatically fetch the credential from credential manager and it will authenticate this thing to your RDS engine. So this is how it's password based authentication work. And this is how proxy will help you to no need to even store the credentials anywhere else. So you can store the credential in Secret Manager and proxy will automatically fetch the credential from the Secret Manager, because there will be a role which is assigned to this one. Second thing, if you want to access without the credentials, or you want to access using identity and access management or IAM authentication, how does it work? You can even authenticate using IAM authentication. So first you have to specify the proxy address here in the application, as usual we did for password based authentication, and you have to specify in the RDS that when this user or this application is trying to connect here, they can request for a temporary token. So you can store or you can assign the roles here for RDS proxy, that when this application is trying to connect it, it will automatically call to the IAM endpoint and it will request for the token. Once it's got the token, it will connect to the RDS database. So that means it will help you, the proxy itself help you. So even if you have a password based authentication, it will retrieve the password from the secret manager. Even if you have a identity based authentication or IAM based authentication, it will fetch the token from here and it will authenticate to your database engine. So this is how RDS proxy will help you. I will show you how it's look like in practical. So suppose I'm logging. Let's go back. Click on the RDS. So you will be landed to a RDS dashboard. This is the RDS dashboard. It's loading. You can see here currently there is 2 instances which is running there. These are the instances. These are the engine we use, availability zone, size, capacity, VPC, where this is stored. When you collect it, just click on any of the instance and you can see here. This is the endpoint where you can connect to this instance. But if it's publicly accessible, they can assign the public IP to this endpoint, or in DNS resolution they can attach the public IP. If it's not publicly accessible, they can resolve to a private IP. This is the security group where you can control who can authenticate, what source. So basically network level restriction you can set here. These are the security groups which is attached to this one. And you can create the proxy here, and the proxy will allow to authenticate to this particular database instance. So we have a 2 instance, you can allocate it, or you can go here, create a proxy. Here you have to specify the proxy identifier, which is look like the endpoint for RDS instance. Similar, like we will create a proxy endpoint, you have to specify the identifier, what engine you want to compatible. So currently it's compatible with Postgres and MySQL. Then you have to specify the database. So currently we have a 2 database. You can choose whatever database instance you want to connect through this proxy. Now, if you are using a password based authentication, you have to specify your secret manager ID where you store the credentials. Suppose I already stored my password there in database and the secret manager, and this is the credential I have. This is the secret manager, you can see here. This is the secret I stored in secret manager. So proxy automatically take the password from the secret manager according to the role you define and will try to connect to your RDS engine. If you are allowed IAM based authentications, you can allow here. So once you allow, it will automatically fetch the token or the role which is assigned to you, and it will trying to connect to the RDS. So this is how RDS proxy will help you. And RDS proxy is really important in our red teaming assessment, because there is some scenario where we don't have a credentials but we have access to RDS proxy. So even if you have access to RDS proxy, you can authenticate to the RDS and you can exfiltrate the credentials or data from those RDS engine. So this is how it's really important to understand about how RDS proxy will fetch the data, password or token, and how they can authenticate to this engine. So it will help organizations to securely store your credentials, or no need to store the credential in applications, or no need to store hard-coded credential to the application. So it will automatically take care of all these things, all token based authentications or IAM based authentication, or as well as password based authentications. And this is how they can directly authenticate to the RDS instance. So this is the way RDS proxy work. In our subsequent sections, we will discuss about how we can enumerate if there are any proxy, what type of authentication they enabled, what is the database instance where this proxy is supposed to. So we can create a proxy, and one proxy should be mapped to one instance. So suppose you can see here we created this proxy. Suppose if you go for a database, these are the database engine, and you can create the proxy for this instance only. So each and every proxy will handle only one instance, but you can map a multiple instance. So is there, so it will help you to scale the instance level. If it's one is not working, it will connect to the other one, and for security purpose also. But why we are more interested in, we are interested in red teaming, how we can use the proxy for performing red team operations and all these activities. So this is all about what is RDS, how its component, how its authentication mechanism work, how we can connect to the engine, and how we can exfiltrate the data. We will discuss about how we can enumerate all this information using command line utility, how we can connect to a database engine, and all these things we will discuss in our coming section. So this is all about this video. Thank you so much for watching this video.